Hi there. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local, the podcast where you can find inspiration, tips, and recipes for enjoying more local food and drink. I am David Crowley, your host. In today's episode, we'll be talking with Tammy Donroe Inman. Tammy is the author of New England Desserts, which features classic and creative recipes for every season. After earning her chops in the test kitchen of Cooks Illustrated, Tammy spent nearly 20 years writing about food for Fine Cooking, Parents, Yankee Magazine, the Boston Globe, and Serious Eats. Hello, Tammy. Welcome to Cook Local, Eat Local.
Hi, David.
It's great to have you here, and I was just perusing the intro to your new cookbook, which we are going to talk about in depth here. But before I get into that, in reading that intro, I can see you're a perfect guest for this show, which is all about local food and what's fresh and seasonal. But I want to hear a little bit about your backstory. How did you get into cooking and baking? Like, is this a kind of a lifelong passion, or maybe something you've come to more recently?
Yeah, I definitely came to it later in life. I've always been a very passionate eater, but the cooking side of it didn't really appeal to me until, you go off on your own and you realize that the food isn't going to cook itself. Um, so I struggled to teach myself how to cook in my early 20s and finally decided that it was just going to take too long to learn it all myself. So I went to culinary school, actually in Cambridge, the Cambridge School of Culinary Arts in Porter Square. And that was a wonderful experience. And during that time, I actually also interned at Cooks Illustrated magazine, so that I could
Nice.
get some writing experience in addition to some cooking experience.
Oh, that's a great combination. You really went all in. My story's probably a little similar. I always enjoyed eating and figured I better learn to start cooking after getting out of college. But I didn't go the path. I did the slow teach myself, one recipe and a few failures at a time. But cooking school, I guess, is a good way to get a crash course. Was were a lot of people similar to you, like kind of people just trying to figure out how to cook in cooking school, kind of
It was
like,
a
or
lot. It was a mix. There were some folks who were like in restaurant kitchens already. They wanted to make a go as a restaurant chef. There were other
mm-hmm.
people who were career changers. All kinds
Yep.
of people changing careers, all different ages. There were some
Yep.
people from Europe. There was a woman from Japan. So it was a very interesting group of people, and we really learned a lot from each other.
Oh, that sounds fun. And you mentioned Cambridge, and so I did see a reference to Julia Child in your intro. So sounds like you had a chance to meet her somewhere along the way. And this is we're almost on 20th podcast episode here, approaching that. And Julia has not come up yet, so it's about time. So tell us how did you run across Julia, and tell us that story before we get more into your book.
Yeah, so I was working at Cooks Illustrated part-time during culinary school, and it happened to be the very first season of America's Test Kitchen. And so we
Okay.
were, I was behind the scenes cooking the food that they were going to show on set. And it was an afternoon, and I had like this hot sheet pan of cookies, and I'm like, hot pan coming through. And I walked to the door, and it's blocked by this towering figure. And I looked up, and I like couldn't even believe my eyes. she, was, she was there, and nobody had expected her to come. She was so
Oh, wow.
tall, and I was so taken aback, that I stepped back, and there were some dogs at the time. There were some dogs in the office, and I sort of kicked over the water bowls, and there was like water all over the
Oh,
floor. And I
my.
was like, oh my God, Julia Child's going to slip and fall, and it's going to be my fault. But she was fine. She walked in, and
She
she
was
shook.
fine. She didn't fall. Okay.
She didn't
You
fall.
don't
She
want to
said
be
hello to
responsible for
everybody.
a Julia injury. Okay, great. And so you're just I've referenced the intro to your book. It really jumps out, I think, that connection to place with the focus of your book and so forth. And when did that come in, that idea of cooking local and seasonal food and baking what's good and in
Yeah.
season?
When I was going into culinary school and sort of, starting out with my family, starting a family, having two young kids, it just got me thinking a lot more about where the food comes from. We were on a budget, and it just so happens that in addition to seasonal food being more delicious, fresher, riper in many cases, it's also cheaper. So, being on a budget and trying to get the best food for your dollar, I did a lot of local buying, farmers markets. The erstwhile Russo's in Watertown was a
Yeah.
great source for all those like
Mm-hmm.
interesting things you can't find other places. There are so many farms. We're lucky in the Boston area to have so many farms nearby. Um, and
Mm-hmm.
so I joined CSA, actually multiple CSAs
Yep.
over the years. Drumlin Farm, Waltham Fields, Land's
Yep.
Sake, and really like went all in. Like I got a meat share at Chestnut Farm that we still belong
Okay.
to, and
Oh, great.
joined the like fish share through Gloucester, Cape Ann Fresh Catch. So like it was
Mm-hmm.
really fun to to realize the extent to which you can almost eat everything local if you really, really tried
Mm-hmm.
hard enough. And in fact,
Yeah.
I used to blog for quite a while. I had this blog, Food on the Food, and I would sort of chronicle, my adventures, cooking for my CSA. And there was something
Mm-hmm.
going around at the time. This was like late 2007, 2008, called the Eat Local Challenge. And you would really
Mm-hmm.
try to eat as much as you could from your local food shed. And you
Yep.
defined what that was.
Yeah.
So we did that for a month.
Oh, that's fun. That definitely is right up my alley. So that sounds great. But we are here to talk about your book, New England Desserts. And so I would love to hear what's the inspiration for putting that book together? Because I guess have to bridge us from talking CSAs and local meat share and stuff, which is right up my alley. But now we're talking desserts. So how did you come to feature these New England desserts in this new cookbook?
Yeah, it's actually not that big of a leap because, um, you know, being members of CSAs and sort of trying to get your produce from like local orchards and farms, it really got me thinking about like using those ingredients.
Mm-hmm.
In everything, not just dinner, but also dessert. So in the wintertime when there's like a lot of root vegetables and squash galore, I started like putting those into dessert and
Huh. Interesting.
started, yeah, like parsnips, even beets.
Parsnips in dessert. Wow. Okay.
Yeah,
What would
well,
you have? What would you do with that in a dessert?
yeah,
Parsnips.
like similar to carrot cake, you can shred it and add it
Mm-hmm.
to a spice cake, and it's very similar. You can,
Okay, that makes sense.
yeah, you can puree things like beets, even turnips, and add them to cakes as well, or whoopie pies, or what have you. So I actually do have a turnip cake in New England desserts.
Oh, yum. Interesting.
That's a tough sell for
Okay.
some people, but it is
Yeah.
actually really good.
Is it less? I don't like. I like carrot cake, and well, I guess it depends on how it's made. I don't have a big sweet tooth. I almost things that are super sweet. I'm less attracted to that than things that also have maybe a little more savory aspect to it. So I'm guessing some of
Yeah.
those ones that use the vegetables might be in that category.
Yeah, it's like for the parsnip cake, it's like carrot cake. It's not a super strong flavor. For the turnip cake,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like cooked and pureed, you actually do taste the turnip. And so if you
Interesting.
hate turnips, you are not going to like that cake. But if you like turnips,
Okay, fair warning.
yeah, if you like turnips, and my teen boys were very skeptical, and one of them like really liked it. So,
Oh, good. Hmm.
so
So,
anyway,
walk us. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yep.
oh no, go ahead.
Didn't want to cut you off there. So, describe a little bit. I've had a chance to peruse the book, but for those of us, and we warned each other that to remind ourselves we're not we people can't see us. They can. So, if you could just walk people through, if they had the book in your hand, how it's laid out, what kind of recipes they can find, and just give us a
Absolutely.
little thumbnail sketch of it.
Yeah, so it's laid out by season, spring chapter, summer, fall, winter, and then at the end, there's an all season ice cream chapter because we New Englanders will eat ice cream any time of
Oh,
year.
definitely.
Don't
Yep.
need an excuse for that. And so, in the spring, you'll find your strawberry and your rhubarb recipes, as well as
Hmm.
parsnip recipes, um, and things like chocolate whoopie pies. In the summer, you'll get a lot of stone fruits, cherries, more strawberries, and then some like
Hmm.
frozen desserts. Like, for example, um, there is a honeydew jalapeno ice pop recipe.
Wow,
To,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. In the fall, you've got your apples, your pears. There's a Concord grape sorbet. There's a quince upside down cake, and like all kinds of a lot of apple recipes.
Yeah, makes
and
sense.
in and in the winter, you get a lot of chocolate and caramel, butterscotchy flavors, nuts and dried fruit and spices. And then, of course, the ice cream chapters, your ice creams, your toppings, your fraps, and sundaes.
Yeah, great. So people who are listening from other parts of the country might not know what a frap is. That term, that's a pretty New England term, right? Do you want
It
to
is a very New
shed some
England
light on
term.
that one?
Yeah, so a frap, I think, is what a lot of other regions call milkshakes. Um, it's ice cream, milk, maybe a flavoring syrup, blitzed in a blender. But here in New England, a milkshake doesn't have any ice cream. It's just milk and syrup.
Yep.
So in New England, you really want to get the frap because it's got the ice cream in it.
Yeah, definitely. Why skip ice cream? That's crazy.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So now we're approaching, as we're recording this, a couple weeks away from Christmas, and New Year's coming up. So, anything in your book that you think would be wonderful to cook for the holidays for those that observe Christmas, say, or
Absolutely. Yeah, there are a lot of kind of colorful desserts. Like there's a cranberry swirl cheesecake. It's
Hmm.
a cheesecake with like this lovely, red swirled topping. And the cranberry sort of the tartness of the cranberry cuts through the richness of the cheesecake. So that's a really nice
Yum.
one. We've got this pear cranberry slab pie. So it's cooked in a big 9 by 13 pan. And it's got pears and cranberries, obviously, and a high crust to filling ratio so that it's not as much of a mess to cut into pieces for like a
Oh,
large
yeah.
group. And
Hmm.
then there's maple walnut pie, which is like pecan pie, but it's got more of a New England twist, using
Hmm.
local maple syrup and walnuts. And then there's also cranberry walnut steamed pudding. Can you tell I like cranberries?
Yeah.
Cranberry
Well, it's
walnut.
a New England cookbook, so
Exactly. And I really just love the tartness of cranberries with anything sweet. It's just such a
hmm
great counterpoint. And they're so pretty. Um,
hmm
yeah. And there's tons more. There's of course different fudges that you can make: maple walnut, panucci, chocolate fudge for gifting.
yeah. Oh,
There's
yeah.
this,
That's a great idea. Yeah. DIY
yeah,
gifts are great for Christmas.
yeah. There's a great candy that they make in Maine. I don't know if you've heard of this. They're called Needhams, and they're a Maine potato candy.
I saw that the title and the recipe title. I was curious. I have not heard of that.
Yeah, so potatoes are like the main crop of
Sure.
Maine, and
Right.
enterprising cooks came up with the idea of using potato, like cooked mashed potato, to bind a filling for candy. So it's a coconut candy, kind of like a Mounds bar,
Hmm.
and then it's covered in dark chocolate, and
Oh,
you
that's
don't taste the potato,
interesting.
but in it, it's delicious. It's really good.
Hmm. That's very interesting. You've kind of hit upon a couple of the clearly distinctive New England ingredients that you're featuring. Do you want to elaborate a little? I know just reading some of the prose in the book, you definitely talk about some of this background or the foodways here in New England and some of the ingredients. Want to just touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, yeah. So when I was trying to like define for myself what a New England dessert was, I sort of outlined what it meant to me because it's not like,
Yeah.
because people ask me like, well, what is a New England dessert, And so basically I broke it down into desserts that are made with native ingredients, and so
Mm-hmm.
that includes corn, maple
Yep.
syrup, pumpkins, and squash. I mean, these are and wild nuts and berries. These are ingredients that the native peoples have been using for thousands of years. So yeah, so I wanted to make sure that I used those. And then there were also, all of the foods that got brought over when the British came. So people think, oh, apples are such a New England thing, and they are, but
Yeah.
they're not a native fruit. They got brought over
Oh,
along with
okay.
pears and
Hmm.
quince
I didn't know that.
with the
Cool.
British, like
Hmm.
cuttings of the plants were brought over by ship. And
Oh, okay.
so those have come to be associated with New England.
Yep.
So I needed to include those, but it's just interesting to know the history of how those arrived here.
Yep.
Um, and then, of course, there's the seasons and
Mm-hmm.
what grows in each season is definitely part of like the New England culture and history, food
Yep.
history, as well as the contributions that other immigrants have made over time.
Mm-hmm.
So we're talking
Mm-hmm.
about like the honeydew jalapeno ice pops, and maybe somebody was like, "Well, how is that a New England dessert?"
Right. The question did cross through my mind.
Right. And so, this book is classic and creative desserts. So that happened to be
Okay.
one of the
Yeah.
more creative things. So, using seasonal
Sure.
melon with a little hint of jalapeno from, in a
Mm-hmm.
homage to the Latin American immigrants
Mm-hmm.
that live in our communities. So this gave me an opportunity to really bring together, you know, native cuisine, British cooking techniques, and global influences that we are starting to that feel every day. Um, and then the other thing was there are a lot of um, desserts that were invented in New England. The
Hmm.
chocolate chip cookie was invented in New England. The Toll House Inn in Whitman in
Oh,
1938.
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
Wow.
um,
I didn't. Wait,
yeah,
wait. Are you saying chocolate chip cookies were invented in 1938? Is it
yeah.
how did it take how did it take that long to come up with
I
chocolate chip
know,
cookies?
I
Wow.
know.
Huh.
It used to
Interesting.
be that chocolate was just mixed into things. It wasn't like it was
Hmm.
melted and incorporated. It wasn't like chunked.
Yeah.
I know it's
Hmm.
yeah, and chocolate was very bitter and very grainy for a long
Oh,
time.
interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so it wasn't until like the 1900s, like Boston was actually big into like chocolate production, and there was like in Cambridge there's this whole area, confectionery row, where there were a whole bunch of like candy factories there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it took a while, so chocolate has evolved, and during
Mm-hmm.
that time, yeah, people started experimenting with it, and the chocolate chip cookie was born.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's a good story. Learn something
Yeah,
new every day. That's a good one. Now, clearly, this book has natural appeal to us New Englanders. I'm guessing you wouldn't mind selling a few of the books outside New England. You want to sort of any thoughts on why it might be appealing to folks that aren't from these parts?
absolutely. Well, I mean, I think it's not just good for people who live here, but people who have ever like come to visit New England, whoever lived
Mm-hmm.
here, gone to
Right.
school here for any period of time. It's because it's got a lot of
Yeah.
stories about the different states
Right.
and some of the history. But yeah, you don't need to live in New England to appreciate this book because so many of the ingredients are available anywhere, like apples
Sure.
and pears, strawberries and stone fruits and melons and
Yep.
cherries, and there's so many great like crisps and crumbles and
Mm-hmm.
pies. Like you don't have to live in New England to appreciate that delicious stuff.
Yeah. And what I was at, I actually went to like a cranberry dinner with all creative approaches to cranberry. And there I learned, I assumed New England I kind of was the main cranberry producer. And I forget there's another state, I don't know if you have it, that actually produces more cranberries than
I
Massachusetts.
think New Jersey maybe, or
Okay,
possibly
that could be.
Michigan.
Yeah, Michigan came to my mind. So there are some of these ingredients. I know there are other big apple producing states, so I could also see that being another tie-in where it's still local ingredients, especially maybe not Florida, but other northern
Oh yeah, like
states and regions.
Pacific Northwest, New York. Yeah, a lot of apple loving states.
Yeah. Now, one question I have for you, I must confess, I am definitely more of a cook that's like a throw things together, a little more spice, a little more garlic. The precision of baking is sometimes intimidating to me. So, do you have recipes or tips for someone like me to sort of put my toe in the water? Things that maybe, for lack of a better way to put it, are pretty hard to mess up. If you maybe are a little off from proportions or timing or something.
I will tell you that this book is like a really good book to learn from. Like if you're not a baker,
Mm-hmm.
um, I part of my background is I used to teach cooking to like kids and adults and
Hmm.
kids as young as 3 to 5.
Wow.
That was one of my weekly classes. So I mean the recipes I really build them so they're hard to mess up, and
Yep.
I try to give visual cues so that it's
Oh,
not a
good.
matter of time because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's oven is different.
Right, right, right.
Everybody's pan materials are different, like a glass pan versus a metal pan, that
Yep.
can be a change. So um, I think most of these, except for like the really, you know, most of these are pretty easy to make and have really
Yep.
good results. And I will also say that I am not a super precise, like I'm closer to what you're describing. So I never thought I would become a dessert cookbook writer for that reason. But
Right,
what I
right.
what I found over time is that there are windows. Like you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to, if you're making French macarons, you have to have everything precise, your weight, your
Yep.
time, everything has to be so precise. But this kind of like rustic American baking, people have
Mm-hmm.
just used regular spoon. You know what I mean? They
Yeah,
weren't
yeah.
weighing their ingredients. They were taking whatever cup they had and like, so I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yes, follow the recipe. But
Mm-hmm.
these recipes, I substitute things all the time in my recipes.
Yeah.
Sour
Okay.
cream for Greek yogurt, for creme fraiche, like whatever I
Yeah.
have on hand. And so I
Mm-hmm.
kind of have a sense of like where you can go wrong.
Oh,
Um,
yeah. That's helpful. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a good, I mean, it does have some advanced recipes, but it's a really good learning cookbook.
Yeah, I can see that, and that phrase, as far as you were talking, it does make sense that it does seem like a lot of the New England desserts do have that kind of rustic quality that aren't like fancy French, where that would take a lot of higher level technique that
Right,
where you would have had to gone to pastry school, pastry making class or something to be able to know how to
right.
implement it. Yeah,
Yeah, I
great.
think probably the only thing that maybe would take a little extra practice and time would be the fudges because there's like a timing issue
Okay.
that you have to pay attention
Oh,
to. But
okay. Sure.
everything else is fairly straightforward.
Great. Well, this has been really interesting, and we've talked about this book, and it sounds like it would be great any time of the year. But we are approaching a time when people are doing a lot of buying gifts, and it would make a nice gift, I'm sure, for the baker in your life, especially if they have either any ties to New England or happen to live here. So, how somebody listening to this, driving their car, if you can give them a little, we'll put a link to wherever is appropriate in our show notes on at Cook Local Eat Local, but where tell us the different ways people can get a copy of your book or multiple copies.
Absolutely. It does make a great gift. So I will actually be at the Boston Public Market a week from today. So, Saturday the 17th. Um,
Okay, great.
Signing books if people are interested. There are also signed copies, or at least there were, at Porter Square Books in Cambridge, Belmont Books, Concord Bookstore, and the Paper Store. And then for people who aren't in town,
Great.
you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble, and maybe even at your local bookstore. I know that like it's not just New England stores that are carrying it.
Oh, great. Well, that's wonderful. Well, I definitely would encourage people to check it out. It's been great talking with you, Tammy, and learning about the book and your background in cooking and baking and eating local.
Thanks, David. It's been my pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Cook Local, Eat Local. To get the show notes with links for recipes and resources we covered today, Go to cooklocal.eatlocal.com to get the podcast landing page. And please be sure to subscribe to Cook Local, Eat Local, wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a great day with some tasty local food on your plate.